Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'll be talking about the top 10 fiction books that I read in 2020. Now, if you've been following, you'll know I'm making different lists for each genre. I've already done a YA list, a memoir list, and a poetry list. And there are still a couple more to come out after this one. But this list will encompass just general adult fiction that I read. So we've got some historical fiction, literary fiction, and sci-fi. In general, I'm really bad at picking favorites. So there are a lot of these that could have been in more than one placement. I read a lot of really good books this year. So it's been hard to pick favorites, but I did my best. So we can go ahead and get started with number 10, which was actually the last fiction book that I read in 2020. And that is An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green. This is a very character-centered sci-fi novel that's the beginning of a duology. It focuses in on April, who gets her friend to film her with what she thinks is an art installation. It looks really similar to like a transformer. It turns out it was not an art installation, and there are tons of other ones all around the world, and nobody knows how they got there. So the story is following her and the fact that that video goes viral pretty much overnight, winning her a lot of social media notoriety and fame that she was not prepared for, and she's sort of put into the middle of this mysterious stuff that's going on throughout the whole world. So you have the piece of it that's like plot, looking at, what are these robot-looking things? Why are they here? What are they doing? And that gets really interesting. I think that definitely in the second half of the book, that part of the plot picks up a lot. It's mildly interesting towards the beginning. I don't want to give away what makes it more interesting. But throughout the whole thing, I think my favorite part was actually the character piece of it and actually looking at April and how she is flawed as a character and what that fame... what sort of flaws that fame really highlighted. It says a whole lot about kind of the role of social media and how it can impact us. So I'm definitely looking forward to the sequel, which is hopefully going to be one of the books that I read this month. Spot number 9 goes to Sing Unburied, Sing by Jesmyn Ward. This is a novel told in multiple perspectives that focuses in on this family. Certain family members can see ghosts. They can see their ancestors, basically, even though some of them are more reluctant to acknowledge it and talk about it than others. You get to learn some about this family's background, and eventually you get to the point where they're going on a road trip to go pick up the dad who's being released from jail. And this road trip takes up the bulk of the novel. The ghosts in this end up playing a really big role, and thematically, this book just brings up so much. It talks a lot about ancestry, about the roots of the prison system. It also talks a lot about race and racism. The bulk of the family that you really get to focus on is the mom and the mom's parents and that part of the family who are black. But the dad who is in jail is white. I don't want to give too much away, but there is definitely a lot that they deal with in terms of racism, even within families. Overall, this was a really incredible read. I listened to it on audiobook, and it was a really great experience. I'm definitely going to be looking into more of Jesmyn Ward's books. In spot number 8, I have Upright Woman Wanted by Sarah Gailey. And I actually read this book twice this year. I listened to it once on audiobook through Scribd, and then I had to go and buy myself a copy and then reread it. It's very short. I think it might technically be a novella. This is a weird Western novel set in a more dystopian United States, and it follows this girl who ends up going to try to become a librarian. Now, a librarian in this world is not the same as a librarian in ours. The librarians in this book are really the sole people that provide information to the citizens in general. Very highly regulated information. But our main character soon figures out that the librarians are not all that she imagined them to be. This story is super queer and anti-fascist. My main complaint is that I wanted it to be longer. I would love to have a whole series centered around the main two characters in this book. It was really incredible and has me super excited to read all of Sarah Gailey's other novels. In spot number 7, I have The Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead. This is another one that I listened to on audiobook. It focuses in on someone who is enslaved and goes to escape the plantation. In this story, the Underground Railroad is literal. So as well as being, away from safe house to safe house, there is a literal Underground Railroad that plays a pretty big role. I won't go into too much detail with some of the plot points just to avoid spoilers because a lot happens. But the really big thing about the story and the thing that I liked about it a lot is how, tangible different parts of history are. The book itself is, I'm pretty sure, set in the, 1800s, and it deals with slavery, but he pulls from so many different historical events and brings them all into one place. I don't want to go through and break that down too much because I feel like it would spoil or could potentially spoil what ends up happening. But I thought that integrating different points of history all into the events that happen here was really fantastic. And I think that there's a lot that we can really get from diving into that theme. I feel like that doesn't really tell you a lot about the book in terms of what happened, but that's the part of the book that really stuck with me the most. In general, I really like what Colson Whitehead does with history in his books. I read Nickel Boys last year and really liked it, but what he did with Underground Railroad just really blew me away. For number 6, I have The Deep by Rivers Solomon. This focuses in on a colony of sea creatures. I wouldn't necessarily call them mermaids, although some people do when they talk about the book. These people came from the children that were born from the people who were thrown off of the sides of slave ships while still pregnant. So that's kind of the history behind them. And the whole story is focused in on this one person in particular who is expected to be basically the keeper of history. Within the society, there is one person who is the historian, but it goes a little bit beyond that because they actually hold all of those memories. And once per year, they let the memories out so that people can sit with them for a while and then put all of them back up. But this character is tired of doing this. It is too much of a burden for them. So it's kind of her figuring out exactly what to do. So this says an incredible amount about history and trauma. Additionally, the characters were interesting. The actual species was really interesting as well. A lot of people, when they have new species, they keep the sex and gender dynamics the same. But with this, it's a lot more fluid, so I thought that was interesting. Additionally, how the idea for this came about was really interesting to me. It actually came from a song, and it's interesting reading the author's note at the end and how they talk about the canon. That really stuck out to me, just because this was sort of a group project. So the canon was a little bit more fluid in different ways. I found that to be really fascinating as well, on top of, the story itself. In spot number 5, I have Stone Butch Blues by Leslie Feinberg. This is a semi-autobiographical novel that focuses on a Jewish lesbian who is growing up in the 1950s. You get to see this person's story as they're growing up, and then actually getting into the lesbian communities. You get to learn more about the dynamics in the 50s and 60s, and you see the character really coming into their own in terms of sexuality and gender, how they learn from their elders and different things like that. On top of learning about this character and learning about lesbian culture, it also talks about being middle class. And it talks a lot about the workers' rights movement and the role that butch lesbians played within that. There's just so much that this book covers. Another historically interesting thing that it points out is the interactions between gender nonconforming people, both in the gay and lesbian community. So the main character interacts a lot with drag queens and trans women, and there's a sort of camaraderie that they talk about a lot. This was just incredible on so many fronts. There's a reason that it's a classic. Though if you are wanting to read the book, which you can do so for free on the author's website, definitely look into the trigger warnings, because as much as this book really blew me away in a lot of ways, it is devastating. There is so much trauma that this character deals with, and Z spares no details outlining this trauma. There's definitely a heavy trigger warning for rape, sexual assault, homophobia, transphobia, abuse, and police brutality, as well as suicide and antisemitism. So I've already mentioned that I had a really hard time picking which books went into what places. Getting into the top 4, any one of these could have been my number 1 pick. So just know that going in, all of these are just another level of incredible. But in spot number 4, I have Freshwater by Ogee Emezi. This is the story about Ada, who was born with gods inside of her. And you get to hear about Ada's life growing up in Nigeria and eventually immigrating and kind of going back and forth. You learn some about her family, but this is told in multiple perspectives. You get to hear about it from Ada's perspective, but also from various gods and other personalities that reside inside of her. This was just incredible. The writing style by itself was, just beautiful enough to make it a great book. But the things that it says about trauma, about sexuality and gender, it was just incredible. I read all 3 of Ogee Emezi's books this year, and I've said it in my YA video, but if you are not already tapped into what Ogee Emezi is doing, follow them on social media, put their books on hold. It's just amazing. This is another one, though, where you really need to proceed with caution, because, again, there are definitely content warnings. I'll try to put links to resources in the description to really talk about these content warnings. Really, the majority of the books that I mentioned definitely deal with heavier stuff. In some ways, this top 10 list could be top 10 books that made me cry. Part of that's because I'm a crier, but part of that's because these books, for the most part, are really intense. In spot number 3, we have Ogee Emezi once again with The Death of Vivek Ogee. So, from the title, you know that this is going to be intense and sad. The death is right there. This is another multi-perspective book that looks into this family and how they all knew Vivek. You get to hear some from their mom, from their cousin, I believe their dad as well, and then some from Vivek's perspective. This explores a lot in terms of culture, family, obviously, and also looking at gender and sexuality. I have a really hard time talking too much about my opinion of this without some serious spoilers, because the thing that makes this book incredible is the thematic stuff that happens towards the end. And I don't really want to unpack that too much, because that in itself would turn into a spoiler. So I will just say that it deals a lot with the idea of queer authenticity in a way that gave me so many emotions. Again, be sure that you check out the content warnings if you think that's something that you need to do. But this was simply incredible. Now we're getting into the top 2 books that I read this year. And in spot number 2, I have The Seep by Hannah Porter. I talked about this at length in a vlog that I did, but this book just completely fucking blew my mind. This is a very character-heavy sci-fi book. In this, aliens come to Earth called the Seep. They share their technology and completely revolutionizes the way that everything works. With this technology, you can do so many things. So many ailments are healed. People can live for a super long time, and it can change the human body in so many different ways. It also kind of acts as a drug as well. But in this book, the main character's wife decides to do something super drastic, and the main character is really not okay with it. And a big chunk of this book is her mourning in a world where the thing that the wife decides to do is really normal. So she's dealing with all of these different things on top of some extra stuff that starts to happen with the seep. This is another one of those that's really hard to talk about without doing a really deep dive into themes that would just take a really long time and would ultimately be pretty spoilery. But this book just fucking blew my mind. I was reeling after I read it. I had epiphanies about it days after I read it, and it was just a really amazing time. It's definitely one that I'm going to revisit. It's also worth noting that this book has trans representation. Actually, all of my top 5 books have trans representation. So that's cool. I didn't even really think about that until just now. So, trans characters and queer authors are kicking ass, apparently. Then finally, we have spot number 1, which goes to The House of Impossible Beauties by Joseph Cassara. This book tells about the creation of the first all-Latinx drag house. It is set in the 1980s, and it perfectly encapsulates that time period. I don't know how he did it, but the vibes were just spot on. This goes into different people's perspectives, and you really get a sense of who they are. I think that he did that really wonderfully as well. This is actually based off of a true story, and a lot of these characters actually were real people. Obviously, this is fictionalized, but it still draws off of certain things that did happen. So the writing was immaculate, and there were so many themes to take out of this that look at queer history, at the way that people were treated, especially trans people of color were treated. It's really hard to talk about without completely breaking it down and giving you a whole English essay, which you probably didn't sign up for when you clicked on a top 10s list. But needless to say, this was just incredible. This is another one that you'll want to check out the content warnings for, because being queer, being a person of color in the 1980s was not easy, and they do not tiptoe around a lot of the traumatic shit that these people would have had to deal with. And I will also say that as the book goes on, it does get darker. Especially in the beginning, even though there's a lot of fucked up stuff that's going on, there is still a certain lightness that comes from these different characters. But as they start to lose people, you can feel the tone shift, definitely. And I think that's done really beautifully as well. But it does make it sad. This book made me cry more than any other book this year, for sure. But it was really incredible. So, that is what I have for my top 10 adult fiction books of 2020. Definitely let me know if you've read any of these, and let me know a couple of your favorite 2020 reads in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Bye.